Boxing news!
Okay, we'll start with this. We'll post-fight after his win this weekend over Jason Maloney. Naoya Inoue had this to say. He said, Ubali or Donaire for the WBC and Casimero for the WBL. Those are within my sights as far as targets go. It seems that political boundary lines aside, the monster, Naoya Inoue, still has his eyes on the prize. He still wants the same thing. Per a tweet from Michael Benson, Bob Arum has said there is a very good possibility that they will revive Naoya Inoue versus John Riel Casimero for February or March. The WBA, IBF, and WBO unification was due to happen in April, but they ended up taking other fights as the pandemic interrupted.
And just speaking of interruptions,
former super bantamweight king, now 118-pound contender Guillermo Rigondeaux took to Twitter to address Naoya Inoue, and he says, we all know who you don't want to see him fight with next. If I'm being honest, I don't think the Naoya Inoue people view Guillermo Rigondeaux fighting him as any kind of a priority. What they appear to be looking for are unification matches with the two remaining world champions in the bantamweight division. All Rigo holds, all he brings to the table is a lesser version of a belt that Naoya Inoue already has. And outside of the WBA actually ordering that fight, mandating that Naoya Inoue must defend his WBA title against the WBA regular champion, Guillermo Rigondeaux, outside of that, I really don't see these two guys fighting. I just don't. We know that such mandates have come down from the WBA in the past, where they'll order their super champion to defend his title against the regular champion. They did it with Anthony Joshua and Alexander Povetkin. They did it with Gennady Golovkin and Daniel Jacobs. But you can't set your watch by this, you understand. They don't always send out those mandates in a timely fashion. And time will tell if, for example, the WBA orders Davis versus Lopez. We know that Teofimo Lopez, he's the WBA super champion in the lightweight division, and we also know that Gervonta still currently holds the lesser version of his title. Is the WBA going to order that fight anytime soon? Time will tell. Back to the bantamweight division, I don't see Rigo getting this opportunity outside of a mandate from the WBA, because the Naoya Inoue people are belt hunting. They're hunting for the scalps of champions, not challengers. Naoya Inoue's top-ranked debut was supposed to be John Riel Casimero months ago, but the pandemic interrupted that, and now Guillermo Rigondeaux wants to interrupt what plans Naoya Inoue has here today. But there are political boundary lines to be addressed, because Guillermo Rigondeaux is a PBC fighter, and Naoya Inoue is a top-ranked fighter. I find it rather peculiar that Guillermo Rigondeaux has so decided to campaign at 118 instead of his old stomping grounds at 122, because at 122, the PBC actually has two world champions there.
they do.
Two world title opportunities for a fighter like Guillermo Rigondeaux. We know that the former WBC champion Ray Vargas has now been labeled a champion in recess. He's a PBC guy. But the next runner-up who took his seat as the WBC's champion, Luis Neri, he's a PBC guy. It's not just him. Angelo Leo, the current reigning WBO champion, who picked up Emmanuel Navarrete's vacant title when Emmanuel vacated it to move upstairs to 126. Angelo Leo is a TMT/PBC fighter. That's the side of the street that he fights on as well. I find it curious that there are two active reigning world champions in Guillermo Rigondeaux's old stomping grounds, and he's not making anywhere near as much mention of them as he's making of Naoya Inoue, a top-ranked guy.
What happened to him last time he called out a top-ranked guy?
That fight, the Vasyl Lomachenko fight that took place at 130 pounds. That fight had a level of fan interest and fan push that Inoue versus Rigondeaux doesn't have, and that's mostly because of how Rigondeaux performed in the Lomachenko fight, that when you got the opportunity, the big opportunity that you were asking for, you quit. I will say that, well, that was at 130 pounds. I told you guys ahead of that fight that Rigo is simply too old and too small to win that match. Nevertheless, people insisted that he was going to expose Vasyl Lomachenko. He was going to break his jaw the way he broke Amagasa's jaw. All those people have since disappeared. Better still, this fight at 118 pounds. It is a fight that Rigondeaux would be more adequately suited to have, but I'm still not convinced that he's going to get it. He doesn't have anything that Naoya Inoue wants. He's well past his prime. I think he's 40, well over 40 if I'm being honest. And you'd have a hell of a hard time trying to convince people that there's something for Naoya Inoue to avoid in Guillermo Rigondeaux. We all saw that Laborio Solis fight.
His last two fights.
Very curious performances in Rigondeaux's last two outings that indicate he's still good enough to beat certain kinds of guys. It's just that Naoya Inoue is not one of those kinds of guys. He's a cut well above those kinds of guys, Julio Ceja and Laborio Solis. That being said, I just don't get it. I don't understand why Rigo isn't putting more pressure on what fights can be made on his side of the street when we all know those are the only kind of fights that the PBC is interested in making.
In-house stuff.
Are they going to send Rigo over to Top Rank? Because that's the only way I see it happening. And that's if Naoya Inoue is even interested in having such a fight, which I don't think he is. They've got two world champions at 122 pounds. Rigo's old stomping grounds, where he did some of his best work, where he was a unified champion. I don't get it. What are you going to do? Waste what time you have left in the sport of boxing pursuing a fight that you're not likely to have when there are two fights right there at 122 that you can have? Guillermo Rigondeaux can't have but just a few fights left, 1 or 2 more years in the sport of boxing. I mean, it's a wonder he's still around now. The guy's 40 or over 40, and he's a bantamweight who's over 40. The bottom line here is, I don't think that Rigo has any more time to waste on these kinds of call-outs. In heavyweight news, it's looking like Tyson Fury's next opponent is going to be Germany's own Agit Kabayel, which comes as no surprise to me. This confirms my previous contentions that Tyson Fury is looking to keep busy with someone, and it's got to be someone interesting enough that there is some mild interest, but not so interesting that he's running certain risks. Agit Kabayel flies relatively low on the radar as far as what up-and-coming unbeaten contenders the heavyweight division has to offer. For what it's worth, he does have the look of a polished boxer, of a quality operator. He's just missing a few names to facilitate that kind of a reputation. His biggest and best win is still that Derek Chisora fight that happened in Monte Carlo. And based on this weekend's action with cruiserweight darling and now heavyweight contender Alexander Usyk, I think it's a victory that for Agit Kabayel has aged well, because Agit's victory over Derek was decisive, and he didn't have the struggles that Alexander had this past weekend. That Kabayel fight really wasn't a hard fight to score. In hindsight, here today, you really can't say that Agit Kabayel hasn't fought anybody. He has. He fought Derek Chisora. The virtue of taking on Agit Kabayel as opposed to someone else, some other of Tyson Fury's top-ranked stablemates, guys like Carlos Takam, whose name was also, still is also, in the hat to face Tyson Fury. The virtue of facing Agit as opposed to Carlos is that Carlos is rough and tumble. Win or lose, this guy's going to try to make it a real Donnybrook, real dust-up, make it a real physical fight. The kind of fight to where, even if you win, you walk away from it, you might suffer some wear and tear, perhaps suffer some injury, fending this very physical, able-bodied fighter off. I think a very similar principle applies to Oscar Rivas. Those two guys, they're come-forward punches. They're aggressive guys, whereas Agit Kabayel, for all his virtues, really isn't a big puncher. I mean, if he's missing anything, he's missing that. Authoritative shots. He's a quality operator, but he's more of a finesse fighter than a ferocity guy. It's for this reason that I figured if Tyson Fury's going to go with anybody, if it's between Carlos Takam and Agit Kabayel, he's likely going to go with Agit Kabayel. He stands a better chance of being able to preserve himself, not suffer any debilitating injuries against Agit that he might suffer trying to fend off a Carlos Takam or a Oscar Rivas. It seems that time has proven me right. We all know what the game plan here is, and we all know what's on the docket for next year. We could be looking at 2, not just 1, but 2, Joshua versus Fury undisputed heavyweight title fights.
You obviously don't want to go into that fight injured.
Tenderized, coming off of physically taxing, physically arduous fights. You want to go in the best possible condition that you can be in. You want to go in fresh, but you also want to go in sharp. It's for this reason that Tyson Fury is insistent on having a fight before the year is out. Another one.
Because the Wilder rematch was back in February.
And what Team Fury wished to do is to keep the momentum going. Don't let this guy sit on the shelf collecting dust as a result of the pandemic. That if you can get him out there against somebody, just fucking
Been off
do
for
it.
6 weeks. In fact, it was called off whilst we were live on air on BT. And Tyson Fury was in the studio with me that night, as was Frank Warren. And they were on the phone to Shelley Finkel, the man, basically Deontay Wilder's man on earth. And I could hear Tyson Fury saying, Shelley, just get me a venue. Just get me a venue. And it was the next day that we found out that there'd been some problem and it wasn't going to happen. It was not going to happen, the third fight. The way Wilder's reinvented history is he's come out of his bunker, on Saturday morning to find out that he's not fighting Fury in a third fight in December. He's known for 6 weeks.
That audio from Steve Bunce of BT Sport, who I'm sure our friends in the United Kingdom are already familiar with.
He's known for 6 weeks.
Essentially lending credence to the notion that all of this that we're seeing from Wilder now is strategy, that he has rather strategically, come out of hiding, that he's in the know, he's in the loop, he knows what's going on, but he's acting brand new, he's acting outraged, as if this is the first that he's heard of Tyson Fury potentially fighting someone else when he's known for weeks that the fight was off. Making all this talk coming from the Wilder side of things of filing suit for not honoring the rematch clause, the rematch agreement, making all of that just a lot of ho-hum, hocus-pocus, smoke, and mirrors. He already knows that legally they don't have a leg to stand on. In my previous video, we talked about how whether or not this is all a master plan or a mental breakdown. What is it that we're looking at exactly from Deontay Wilder? Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. It could be a bit of both, though one more than the other. And what this soundbite from Steve Bunce lends credence to is that this is, in fact, a master plan. This is what they want to do. They don't actually want or didn't want a Tyson Fury rubber match straight away, not under these circumstances. So we must revise and review what reason for that could there be. The most obvious reason is that the guy got his fucking ass kicked, and he's not strategic enough a boxer to make the necessary adjustments to prepare himself for a third fight. That if he had a third fight straight away, he'd likely lose that fight worse than he just lost the second, and to some, the first fight. There's that, and that's the more obvious answer, but there's also the global pandemic and the fact that had they had this third fight sooner rather than later, they'd be missing out on millions and millions of dollars from an audience being in attendance, because as it stands, the audiences aren't completely back yet.
That's another reason to put the third fight off.
Ask yourself a question. Do you think he's gonna go in there, or that his handlers would let him go in there after the shellacking that he just took to this same guy? To do that again when there ain't no crowds present, when there ain't no live gate revenue, you think they want to do that? No, of course not. Not straight away.
But they still want to save face.
They're not just gonna walk away from it publicly for fear of how that might affect Wilder's public persona. They're still trying to market this guy to me and you. They're still trying to sell him. So they won't just walk away publicly. Behind the scenes, they know exactly what's going on. But to me and you, they want to perpetuate something else. Some other image, some other narrative.
More shyster tactics.
More time wasting from the time wasters. Eddie Hearn, this weekend, he reacted to Wilder's resurgence, his emergence from out of hiding. He had this to say.
So, let the real players, let the big boys do their thing, go in there and give everybody entertainment. Deontay Wilder, he's gone out of the picture. He had his chance. I can't remember what the package was that the Zone offered him, 60, 80 million for 3 fights or whatever. He bleeped it up the wall, right? So, he's gone. All I know is Anthony Joshua has to beat Kubrat Pulev on December the 12th. If he does that, he will fight Tyson Fury twice next year. So forget about Deontay Wilder. He can surface again in 2022 or 2023. He'll probably be retired by then. So let's worry about the real players, the real men who are saying, no, I get chinned, I come back, because that's what we do. We're champions. And I don't see that kind of behaviour from Deontay Wilder.
And you won't, because that's not what he is. I've long said that Wilder's a gimmick. Perhaps he has a decent-sized punch. Perhaps he's one of the bigger punchers the division has to offer. But there's a reason that his career has panned out the way that it has. And there's a reason that we're seeing what we're seeing from Deontay Wilder here and now. What this guy might be doing is strategically re-emerging right before Tyson Fury makes his opponent choice so that he can save face. Pretend that he wanted to go right into that third fight.
Right.
Spend all of next year trying to stay relevant by name-dropping Tyson Fury, by name-dropping Anthony Joshua, because now what they hope to do is get the winner of that fight. And not next year, because they're going to be all booked up with each other all through next year if things go to plan. What this guy plans on doing is calling out two guys who he knows are booked all of 2021 to keep himself relevant so that perhaps in 2022,
A year later.
maybe he can get the fight. And in the mean in between time, you know the kind of guys that he's going to be fighting. You know he's not going to fight a Dillian White, who has been offered up to stand in
Against Fury.
Tyson Fury, now that his fight with Alexander Povetkin has been pushed back. For those that are not aware, Alexander Povetkin just tested positive for COVID-19, and his fight with Dillian White has been pushed back to January of next year. But Eddie offered up Dillian White, you understand. More to the point, Deontay Wilder in the next 12 months, he won't keep busy with the likes of a Dillian White, that kind of fighter, those kind of fighters. He'll have his pick of the litter. He'll have his lighter touches, all while drawing attention to himself by name-dropping Anthony Joshua and by name-dropping Tyson Fury for the next 12 months, because it's going to take him that long to rehabilitate himself. The plan is for him to be a nuisance, the nuisance that he's always been, the time waster, whilst attempting to save face. That could very well be what this is, that conspiracy theory. It might check out.